Hello, good afternoon everyone. I'm Lesley Thain. I'm Head of Education at the Careers and Enterprise Company. I'm delighted to be here today delivering this webinar for governors for schools. I'm hoping that you can all hear me, but I'd appreciate if you can click and raise your hand so I know that you can hear me before I start the webinar. Okay, great, thank you. So since the career strategy was launched back in December 2017, schools across the country have been making great progress towards delivering excellent careers provision. And I'm delighted to deliver this webinar to governors who wish to learn how they can better support their schools when it comes to careers education. So we're going to go through an overview of the career strategy and the remit of the Careers and Enterprise Company, talk to you about the Gatsby benchmarks and their origins, the role of career leaders in schools, and the support and resources that are available through the Careers and Enterprise Company, including our suite of digital tools. I'll then be going through some prompt questions which governors can use to in meetings with career leaders or senior leadership teams in schools, and then I'll be taking quick questions at the end of the session. So the webinar will be about 45 minutes with 15 minutes at the end for questions. So just to set the scene, the government's career strategy was launched back in December 2017, and that was followed by statutory guidance for schools, which was published in January 2018, and guidance for colleges, which was also published in February 2018. Both of those guidance documents were updated and reissued in October 2018. The strategy sets out the plan for building a high quality career system to help young people choose careers opportunities that are right for them. And the aim is for the strategy is to ensure that all young people get an excellent programme of advice and guidance building on their needs. The strategy has been welcomed by the sector and has also been welcomed by schools and colleges across the country. So here are some of the key elements of the career strategy. One of the ongoing legal duties which came into force in 2012 is that every school must ensure that pupils are provided with independent careers guidance from years 8 to 13. The guidance recommends that guidance professionals working with students are trained to at least level 6, and the Career Development Institute are able to advise on the range of qualifications that are available. Excuse me. Another legal duty which came into force last year in January 2018 was the Baker Amendment, which requires schools to allow access to training providers of vocational and technical education to all pupils in years 8 to 13 to inform them about choices. Schools must publish a policy statement setting out the arrangements for provider access and ensure that it's followed. From January 2018, schools should have been using the Gatsby benchmarks to improve careers provision, and the government has an ambitious aim that all schools will be meeting the Gatsby benchmarks by the end of 2020. In September 2018, all schools were required to name a careers leader, and I'm going to talk in a bit more detail about that role further in the webinar. And all schools were also required to publish details of their careers programme and make that information accessible to young people and their parents. That is now a legal requirement and was written at the end of last year into the school information regulations. So some of the strategic goals that were set out in the strategy were all schools working towards and meeting the Gatsby benchmarks by 2020, all schools having a named careers leader in place by September 2018, and schools and colleges offering every young person in years 7 to 13 at least one encounter with an employer by 2020. Schools and colleges will have access to an enterprise advisor by 2020, and the ambition is that all schools should have in place a linked governor for careers. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Gatsby benchmarks, I just wanted to give you a bit of context about how they came about. Back in 2013, the Gatsby Foundation commissioned Sir John Holman, a former head teacher, to carry out some research into what good career guidance would look like. He carried out a series of international visits, and from his research, the 8 benchmarks of good career guidance were formed. They then tested those benchmarks via a survey of 10% of schools in England and commissioned a pilot to test how schools and colleges can move from their starting points to a position of achieving the Gatsby benchmarks. These are the 8 Gatsby benchmarks. It is a simple and clear framework. It has been welcomed by schools. And I think it is fair to say that in lots of schools, there's lots of careers activity, but what the Gatsby benchmark framework does, it gives it a structure to organise that careers activity around, identify strengths and also identify where there are gaps and areas for development. The Gatsby Foundation commissioned a pilot in the North East to test the benchmarks in action. There were 16 schools and colleges involved in the pilot, and some of those schools went from achieving no benchmarks to 6 or 7 by the end of the pilot. The reason the North East was chosen was there is a range of different types of schools, from rural to inner city, and also included in the pilot were schools, colleges and special schools, so that all schools were represented. The Gatsby benchmarks now sit at the heart of the strategy as a framework for both schools and colleges to follow. Moving on now to the work of the Careers and Enterprise Company and how this fits within the aims of the government's career strategy. The Careers and Enterprise Company was originally set up in 2014 to increase employer engagement in schools. In 2011, schools were given the responsibility to organise careers education, and the picture across the country was patchy. Some schools were doing very well, and in other areas it was not happening at all. So we were established to increase employer engagement in schools. Since the strategy was published, we now have a wider remit to support schools and colleges across all of the Gatsby benchmarks. As I said, the Gatsby benchmarks provide a clear and simple framework for schools to organise their provision around. They are challenging, but rightly so, and they ensure that provision is in place for each and every student. Often in schools, we're good at delivering lots of activity, but sometimes this fails to meet our strategic aims. The Gatsby framework clearly sets out that provision that each and every student should receive. The second element of our work is supporting career leaders in schools and colleges. Career leaders for me is one of the most exciting and important elements of the strategy. There is now a requirement for every school and college to have a named careers leader in school. The idea of having someone responsible for careers isn't new, but careers leadership is. Without this position, I don't think that the strategy could be successful. It wouldn't matter how much is invested externally if there's no one in the heart of the school that coordinates and lead activity, then this work would be lost. The government have also made a strong statement in the fact that they are supporting and funding training for careers leaders. We also have a model of local coordination. We have an enterprise advisor network, currently active in 2,700 schools and colleges. We work with all LEP areas and combined authorities, and we'll be scaling up this to reach all mainstream and secondary schools and colleges. The enterprise advisor network is formed through the local enterprise partnerships, and we co-fund roles called enterprise coordinators. Their role is to work with clusters of up to 20 schools and support them with the Gatsby benchmarks, and also match the schools with an enterprise advisor. Enterprise advisors are senior business volunteers who work with the careers leader or the school's senior leadership team to build and develop a career development plan and employer engagement plan. We have also enhanced this local coordination by setting up 20 career hubs across the country, and the government are also funding a further 20. We've spent the last 3 years driving up employer engagement, and you can see in the graph the growth of the network over time. In the schools that we are working in, we've seen a 50% increase in the number of employer encounters for students within those schools. Now over 2,700 schools are in our network and are supported by over 2,000 enterprise advisors. We have high levels of satisfaction amongst those volunteer enterprise advisors, with 82% of those reporting that they agree that the work of the Enterprise Advisor Network is effective. In partnership with the Gatsby Foundation, we developed an online self-evaluation tool called Compass, which some of you may be familiar with. 3,000 schools and colleges have now completed a Compass evaluation, and I think that this speaks volumes about the engagement and commitment of schools and colleges to working towards the benchmarks. The exciting thing for us is that we can now see exactly where schools are excelling, and more importantly, where the challenges are, so we can focus our support in those areas. Here you can see how schools are performing against the Gatsby benchmarks. So this is taken from a sample of schools who have completed the Compass evaluation more than once. In red, you can see the first submissions, and you can see that there's a really low starting base that we've been working from. We are happy that we've seen progress against all of the benchmarks. It is slow, but we're positive that it's moving in the right direction. Some of the most challenging benchmarks are addressing the needs of each pupil, and we are investing in the development of a career leader administrative system, which will look at pupil level tracking to assist with this. Also, we can see that only 19% of schools are meeting the requirements on encounters with further and higher education. And we're working with partners such as Office for Students, National Apprenticeship Service, and others to address this and ensure that careers leaders and the career leader training providers have access to the most up-to-date information and opportunities. We can also see from the data provided through the Compass evaluations that schools in the most disadvantaged areas are doing well. That is partly due to the enhanced support and investment going into those areas, but also that school leaders understand that careers education is so important for these young people in these areas. We're pleased that this work is having real positive impact on young people, and 80% of the young people surveyed have reported an increased awareness in different careers, 75% of an understanding of what they need to do to achieve their ambitions, and 70% of those young people feel more motivated to work hard at school and college. We recognise that we are just at the start of the journey. And I think given that most of the requirements of the strategy have only been in place since September 2018, we would really expect to see further progress once the data is reported in September 19, once those requirements have been in place for a whole academic year. So just going through some of the support that is available to your schools through the Careers and Enterprise Company. I've mentioned already the Compass tool. It is an online self-evaluation tool that should be completed by the careers leader or senior leader with responsibility for careers. The results of the survey should be shared with the head teachers and governing body, and also should be used as the basis for planning for the academic year ahead. You can see there a sample of the survey report, which shows progress against the Gatsby benchmark and also against the national average of schools meeting the benchmark. So it can provide a really useful context for what you're working in. Moving on to the local coordination, I've talked a bit about our Enterprise Advisor Network. We are scaling up that support to all schools and colleges. So by 2020, all schools and colleges will have access to an enterprise advisor through their local enterprise partnership, and will be able to be matched with a business volunteer, an enterprise advisor who can work with a careers leader or SLT to develop that crucial careers and employer engagement plan. On the right-hand side of the slide there, you can see where the 20 career hubs have been established. They were set up towards the tail end of last year, and we're really pleased that the government has provided further funding for an additional 20 hubs. The bids for those hubs are just in and are currently going through the assessment process and will be announced in due course. As I mentioned, every school is now required to have a careers leader, a named careers leader, who is responsible for leading and managing the careers provision within the school. It's really important that schools think about who they are appointing to the role and the time commitment that that person has given. And I'm going to talk through in a moment the models, but it's important to note that the careers leader is not the same as a careers advisor, although these roles should work together, but they can be combined. The careers leader is a leadership role and needs to have a strong route to the school's SLT if they are not already a member of the senior leadership team. We are supporting careers leaders with training and have a number of training courses available, which I will go through the details of in a moment. As well as that, we also have a free online training course for all careers leaders in the country to access. So how can schools organise careers leadership? A study was carried out almost 2 years ago, and these are some of the models that came from that study, with the most common being either middle leader or senior leader. Appointing a middle leader to the role of careers leader can have many benefits. That person may be a teacher with some additional responsibility, can often be combined with other responsibilities, but it's crucial that if the careers leader is a middle leader, they have a clear route and support from the senior leadership team. It can also be hugely beneficial to appoint a senior leader as a careers leader. They will be given direct responsibility for the leadership of careers, is often combined with other responsibilities as a senior leader. Often we see senior leaders in the position of career leaders who are able to move things and progress careers activity at a much faster rate than middle leaders, but both are very common in schools. Some schools have an outsourced leadership model and the school contracts an external organisation. In some schools we have distributed leadership models where the responsibilities of career leadership are shared between a group of senior or middle leaders working together as a team. And increasingly, we're seeing a multiple school leadership model, and that is particularly common within multi-academy trusts. Before I move on, just important to note that there are a range of models, and we've seen careers leaders implemented in a range of different ways. The Careers and Enterprise Company and Gatsby have commissioned some research into how careers leaders have been implemented in schools. The field work for this research will be carried out in the second half of the second term, and we're looking to publish the results of those studies before the end of the academic year. So we'll have a really clear picture about how careers leaders have been implemented nationally. We have appointed 14 training providers to provide face-to-face training for careers leaders, and they are listed here. We have awarded 1,300 bursaries so far. We were really pleased that the government increased funding for this, because in the strategy they initially announced bursaries for 500, but we were all overwhelmed by the demand and interest for careers leaders for this training. There are a range of different courses with both accredited and non-accredited routes available. We also encourage everyone with an interest in the careers leader role, including heads and governors, to complete the online training. The online training is a self-study course. It's 12 hours. There are 5 modules. And we encourage everyone interested in the role to complete that training. So do share with your senior leadership team and your governing body. As well as our compass and tracker tools, we also have a range of web-based support. There is a suite of modules on careers leadership, including videos from head teachers giving their perspective and why they have invested in careers. We are developing our compass and tracker tool, as I mentioned, to bring that down to student level. We've recognised that student level tracking for careers is a real challenge for schools, and we are developing and testing a career leader system, which we hope to launch before summer. We have published a range of guides and resources for schools. There is a careers leader guide for schools, which outlines the roles and models of career leadership that I briefly mentioned in the previous slide. We have also published a Gatsby benchmark toolkit for schools, which provides some real practical advice on how schools can access support and work towards meeting the benchmarks. We also have a range of research publications that can be useful for schools, including work experience, teacher CPD, transition skills. So I would encourage you to find those on our website. We also have developed a range of support for special schools and also mainstream schools working with students with SEND. We published a research publication, Transition Programmes for Young People and Adults with SEND, a Send Gatsby toolkit, which gives specific information as to how schools and special schools can access support for young people with SEND. We also worked with National Grid on an employer engagement toolkit, which provides some useful advice to businesses who want to engage and support young people with SEND, but might not necessarily know how to go about it. We are also developing a SEND community of practice, which will allow schools and those supporting young people with SEND to come together, share good practice, and work together towards getting the best solutions for students. Earlier this year, Ofsted have published their draft inspection framework for consultation, and we were delighted to see careers features there. We will be responding to the consultation, and we have already consulted with our head teacher advisory group, who are pleased to see that this fits under the personal development section and focuses on the inputs rather than outputs. So if you're a governor and you want to provide some further support and challenge to your school's leadership team and the careers leader, here are some of the prompt questions that you should be asking them. So, has your school appointed a careers leader? This was a requirement from September 2018. So this information should now be published on the school's website, along with the details of the careers programme. As I mentioned, that is now a legal duty and was written into the school information requirements. It's also important to challenge and check that the school is compliant with its statutory duties and that those are reflected in the school's careers policy. I mentioned the requirements to publish a provider access policy and also the requirement to ensure students have got access to a careers interview and guidance with a level 6 trained careers advisor. So, as I mentioned, careers leaders should use the Compass tool to evaluate and assess the school's performance against the benchmarks. Careers leaders have got an option to share that report, and we encourage all careers leaders that we work with to share with their head teacher, SLT and governors. You should be looking to check to see if a whole school action plan has been developed to address any weaknesses assessed in the Compass evaluation. Please do ensure that the careers leader has regular access to the governing body and is able to come and present regularly on the progress of the careers programme. Also, the careers leader should be reporting on the destinations of the students. And now the recommendation is to put in place a planning system to collect, analyse and destination data for a period of 3 years once students have left school. Think about if the governing body know how the curriculum promotes progression to further education, training, apprenticeships and employment, and challenge the school to see if they're using labour market information to inform decision making for students and promote progression. And hopefully you're all being invited to attend careers events at the school. Further support for governors can be found via both Governors for Schools and the National Governance Association, both of whom have published specific guidance on the career strategy. And I've included the links on the site there. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the requirements of the career strategy and statutory duties for schools. I'm sure that there are many questions. Now I can see them coming up on the screen. So the first question was, what was in place before and how does this new guidance differ? So pre-2011, there was a national service, Connections, that all schools could access. Once that was disbanded, schools were given the autonomy to manage their own careers education. There was, of course, the statutory duty to provide access to a qualified careers guidance professional and provide an interview for students, one before the age of 16 and a further by the age of 18. But in fact, there wasn't much guidance at all, which is why we had a situation that was very patchy, with some schools doing it very well and others not at all. So hence why this guidance has been welcomed by schools and colleges. Second question here, how should the school approach the LEP? So if you go to the Careers and Enterprise Company website and go to the Schools and Colleges section and click on Sign Up Your School, that will put you in contact directly with your local representative. What I would say is in some areas, as I mentioned, we are still scaling up. So please be patient while they get back to you. But if you haven't heard from them in a couple of weeks, then you can contact us and the central team at education at the Careers and Enterprise careersandenterprise.co.uk. I'll ensure that those details are added onto the slides before we publish them. Sorry, I don't know off the top of my head who the right contact would be for your school. The URLs for Compass and Tracker. Yeah, we can share those in the slides, and also I can provide the login for a demo account. You can also get in touch with our technical team, who'd be happy to arrange a call and talk you through how both products work, and I would recommend that you do that. When working with companies, is there something like a model contract for fixing career perspectives for individuals? I'm afraid I'm not sure I completely understand that question, so I will possibly come back to that one. Yes, absolutely. A copy of the presentation will be made available, and I'll also make available all of the relevant documents and guides in PDF format. So requirements for primary schools. So I know that Governors for Schools have got a range of resources on their website, and Will has posted the link for those there. In the career strategy, the government announced a fund of £2 million to pilot some work in primary schools. That work has not started yet. Bidding has just closed for that work, and we're in the initial stage of assessment. Delivery of the primary pilot work will be starting in September and will continue through to July 2020. And as soon as those successful providers have been announced, we can certainly share that with Governors for Schools to be shared with all of the primary governors. We are also working on the production of a primary careers toolkit, and we'll be working closely with those funded providers to build that toolkit. We're also working closely with NHT on all of our primary work. Please, could you show the questions for governors again? Yeah, we're going to send the slides. So students in disadvantaged areas, yeah, there's a range of additional support. So depending on where you are, if you're in an opportunity area, schools may receive a virtual wallet. So all of our funds are now administered to schools through a virtual wallet, where schools are allocated a sum of money which can be spent on activities through our careers provider programs which we fund. And if you want to get in touch about what is available in your area, then please do contact us at education@careersandenterprise.co.uk, and I can provide you with some more information. Well, thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for the questions. Happy to stay on the line if there are any further questions. Otherwise, we will be sending out the slides along with all of the resources mentioned very shortly afterwards. Okay, thank you, and have a good afternoon, everyone.